right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to start blowing through each one of these questions here one by one. First of all, welcome. Thank you guys for putting the extra time in. I really do appreciate it. And I know that you guys are putting that extra effort in. It goes a long way. So let's go ahead and get rolling with question number one. Can you go over the key points of the English Civil War? Something that I've learned over the course of the last couple of days, as you guys have been kind of going through these comparative revolutions, is that some of you guys are having a little bit of trouble with that English Civil War. So breaking it down very simply. First, we have Charles, and he was a big-time absolutist. Now, Charles kind of pushed his people too far. We don't need to go too terribly far into detail. But basically, he's trying to implement a whole bunch of different policies that are unpopular amongst his peoples, among them being taxation, religion, big things that we'll see come up after the English Civil War and the Enlightenment. So Charles pushes his people pretty far, and eventually it leads to a rebellion. That rebellion led by the New Model Army, mostly under Cromwell and the other parliamentarians, push back against Charles and eventually defeat him and execute him. This puts in what we call the Long Parliament, where Parliament reigns over England for several years, implementing a lot of different Puritan ideals. Because of that, following the death of Cromwell, he and Parliament became fairly unpopular. This leads to the restoration under Charles II, Charles's son. The big thing here is that the chaos of the English Civil War is going to lead to Thomas Hobbes writing the Leviathan while he's in exile from England. The reason he writes the Leviathan is he sees the chaos around him. He's part of the chaos of England. And he realizes that the reason for that is that they've lost their big leader, their absolutist, that leader that's supposed to have the power of the biblical Leviathan. So he writes this book in an effort to argue that we have to have that. That's our social contract. We need an absolutist ruler whom has complete control, and we should just accept them, no matter their flaws, because if one of them dies, eventually another one's going to come along, and then you'll get the good leader back. But most important is that we avoid that chaos by continuing to follow his rule unquestioned. This, again, was Thomas Hobbes, and this later leads to Locke's rebuttal in the two treatises of government. So following Charles II's reign, you have James II, and James II also is very much of an absolutist, and he starts to push the people the wrong way. This leads to them using John Locke's two treatises of government to justify not overthrowing him, but more pushing him out of office early. And he gets replaced by his daughter Mary and William of Orange, William and Mary. And the two of them come in under the condition that they sign what's called the English Bill of Rights. Now, the English Bill of Rights is essentially a codification or a written law based around John Locke's two treatises of government and the whole concept that we do have natural rights and that even an absolutist doesn't quite have the ability to take those away from us. It goes against the order of things. So the English Bill of Rights is a protection for the English people, making sure that they don't lose those same rights ever again. So moving forward, that's pretty much the premise of the English Civil War. You need to know that as a big context for the Enlightenment, because Hobbes and Locke, those are the two key members that lead off what becomes the Enlightenment. So as a brief overview of the Enlightenment, again, people take the scientific revolution and they use it on human beings. So rather than just looking at objects and things in nature, we actually look at human beings and government and try to ascertain, try to figure out what the natural order of humans are. The big thinkers there, again, you have Hobbes and Locke, which we've already covered. You have Voltaire. His big thing was about free speech. You have Rousseau and his general will, as well as social contract, where he believes that the people are in charge. The people have sovereignty. That's that popular sovereignty ideal. Other than him, you also need to know Mary Wollstonecraft. That's going to be a big one because this is one of the only isms that we've really covered so far. We were kind of holding off on them until they became more intense. But Mary Wollstonecraft will be important because she's an early founding member of feminism. She was in England and argued that women need equal education because they have the same capacity as men. You'll also see the same or a similar argument in Olympe de Gouges' The Declaration of Rights of the Female Citizen, in which she outlines the fact that females should have the same rights as men because if all men are created equal, then so too would women be. And it goes kind of poorly for her as well in the middle of the French Revolution. So those are the big ones that you guys need to know. And so for that, you need to know what their effects were. So in other words, if you were reading a letter, you should be able to say, wait, that's an Enlightenment ideal. You should be able to read through a document, and you guys have already done this. Read through something like, for example, Bolivar's Jamaica letter, or read through an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence, and you should be able to say, this is an Enlightenment thought. The key takeaways from the Enlightenment here, other than the philosophers, are that the Enlightenment is going to move forward and end up influencing those revolutions. It's going to end up starting them off. So it's one of the biggest causes of revolutions. So number 3, I have a quick recap of the Haitian and Latin revolutions. For the Haitian Revolution, you need to understand that this takes place in the middle of the French Revolution. So Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, is a French colony that they use a lot of slaves for sugarcane plantations. Now, because of that, there's a great deal of slavery population there. And as France is revolting and passing things like the Declaration of the Rights of Man, claiming that all men are equal, at the same time, they still continue to run these plantations with copious amounts of slaves. Because of that, Toussaint Louverture, as well as several others, rise up against the French slave owners because they believe that if all men are created equal, are they not also created equal? So that's the big push from Haiti. What you need to know about Haiti, in addition to that, is the fact that it is a revolution unlike most of the other Atlantic revolutions. Most of the other Atlantic revolutions, the upper crust of society was the one kind of spear fronting. They were the ones starting off every one of these revolutions using Enlightenment ideology. However, with Toussaint Louverture and Haiti, you see kind of a shift because this was mostly led by the lower classes of society. So it's very important that you guys can distinguish what Haiti might have different than other revolutions. For the other Latin American revolutions, mostly led by Simón Bolívar, most of those, what you need to know is that they, again, use these Enlightenment ideals as a jumping point. They have the criollos, the higher members of society, really contributing to this because they're the ones pushing for these extra rights. They feel like they've been kind of left behind as the rest of Europe or the Americas has been changing towards this more egalitarian kind of ideology, this idea that all men are created equal. So the criollos, they want more power. They're, again, the upper part of society, and they start to lead these revolutions. But their revolutions vary from the others in a key part, too. Rather than more of a democratic society, they do lean more towards an autocratic society where you have one strong ruler in the middle, and then they're the ones who are really running the show. Key points of the revolution: congresses, assemblies, governments, etc. that you guys need to know. For all of the revolutionary congresses and assemblies and governments, you guys really need to be familiar with the concept of that equality again. So, for example, with the French Revolution, you get, or the tennis cordos, you continuously meet until they pass that Declaration of Rights of Man, their constitution, their Bill of Rights. For Parliament, you also need to be familiar with the fact that Parliament is running the show in terms of trying to push for more rights in England before and right at the beginning of that Enlightenment. For the Americas, you need to be familiar with the Declaration of Independence as well as the Constitution and what their impacts are. So you need to know that Constitution, their Bill of Rights, is modeled after the English Bill of Rights, the same way that the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen is modeled after the Constitutional Bill of Rights and the English Bill of Rights. There you go. That's question number 5, too. What was the Declaration of Rights of Man? It was the essentially Bill of Rights or Constitution of the French Revolution that was written by Le Marquis de Lafayette. How well do you guys need to know primary source documents? You need to be familiar with what document links to what revolution and what inspired those documents. So again, you should be able to look at any of these letters and point it out and say, you know, that right there, that's an Enlightenment ideal. That's something that John Locke said. What outcomes of the revolutions are most important to understand? The big outcomes of revolutions here, the biggest one that's going to make an impact on our next unit, I would argue, would be Napoleon. Napoleon's impact, that Congress of Vienna, is going to shift the way that Europe kind of operates. And again, we're gonna go way further into depth in that in the near future. For right now, you guys need to be more familiar with the causes of revolution and those events into the revolution. We will deal more with the aftermath of the revolution as next week kind of progresses. So for that, don't worry too terribly much on it for this test. Some important people and know what they did. Again, you're looking for the revolutionary leaders here. Even if it's not on the test, you should be very familiar with who Robespierre is. You should be familiar with the Marquis de Lafayette, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, any key member of these revolutions that has been an issue here. You need to know. So Toussaint Louverture, you need to know that name and that it links with Haiti. Simon Bolivar with a lot of those Latin American ones. Any topics you guys can focus on studying for the SAQ, guys, I will cue you in on this. The SAQ is an open-ended question, which means it was written so that you guys could show off your knowledge rather than to try to trick you. Multiple choice questions are to find out what you don't know. Open-ended questions are to find out what you do. So there is no one right answer, and you need to know that moving into it, okay? No one right answer. There are 3 parts to it. All 3 parts are going to deal in some way, shape, or form with something that overarches the whole unit. So key ideas that we have talked about repeatedly throughout this unit should be very obvious as you try to think about them. Think about what has big impacts on all of the events that we've talked about. That is the best way to kind of prepare yourself for an SAQ. Really quickly, to review writing an SAQ, guys, here's the trick, and I know that this is going to sound like I am joking. I am not joking. Just answer the question. It's going to ask you to explain one detail. When it says explain one detail, it's not saying tell me about what this is. That's more of a context. That's LEQ stuff. When you're looking at the SAQ and it says explain one thing that proves this, all you have to do is say, here is an example and here's how it proves it. You can get this done in 2 sentences. Sometimes you can get it done in 1 if it's complex. Guys, all you have to do is focus on, does this completely answer the question or not? Because all it is a point for you answering the question or no point if you don't answer. So it doesn't matter if you've proved that the question is valid. All you have to do is answer it. That's the biggest tip. That's the biggest trick on the SAQs. You have 13 minutes, so you have to work fast. My advice is read the question, write an example down. You don't have to write a whole sentence, just write a word. Write an example down, move to the next one, do the same. Once you have 3 examples, then flesh it out and try and get it all done. For the main isms that you need to know for the unit and romanticism, guys, we're going to talk about that really starting Friday. But the big ism you need to know for this test, feminism does start to rise during the Enlightenment, so that one will be on the test. The main ideas of the Congress of Vienna is that they don't want another Napoleon. The idea is that they want to restore the balance of power in Europe so that no one country can gain too much. This is kind of the starting footstone of what's going to end up being all of the problems leading up to World War I. Again, we're talking way more about this as next week comes in, but basically how it's going to go down is that the Congress of Vienna leads to a race of sorts to imperialism. So that is the end of our pre-prepared questions. If anybody wants to go back in and kind of fill those in so that we can get just a quick answer sheet, y'all are more than welcome to do that. If nobody wants to do that, that's fine. Those questions were just kind of a list of talking points for me. Looking at the chat real quick, I'm going to look at the chat, answer any questions that are there, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this bad boy up. All right, the Enlightenment causes revolutions because it puts in the idea of people that everybody is equal. If everybody is equal, then why should the king have complete power? And most importantly, it puts into their minds this idea of natural rights. If everybody has the right, specifically, and the really big one for the British and the really big one for the Americans and for the French is the right to property. They're afraid that the king is pulling their property away unjustly. So that right to property is one of the biggest things that they want to defend. Again, remember, this is that upper middle class that we're talking about. So the Enlightenment leads to that by giving people this idea that they naturally have a right to these things like property or free speech, and that if a king tries to take them away, that shouldn't be allowed. And so under Locke or under Rousseau, these people are now saying, not only are these natural rights important, supposed to be protected, but if a ruler doesn't protect them, it is your right to overthrow that ruler and to replace them with a new one. And that's really the key part that leads to these revolutions. New governments formed after the Haitian and Latin American revolutions. Haiti doesn't really get a new government, not this time around. For the Latin American revolutions, we start to see, again, more autocratic. We have people in charge, and these criollos kind of rise to fill the void that Spain left when it went away. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you all about 5 more seconds. If you have another question, you can drop it into the comments in YouTube. If not, I think that about covers everything. Let me go ahead and kind of scroll through here real quick and make sure that I didn't miss anything that you guys asked that might need to be addressed. Yeah, only one SAQ on the test. Priya, yes, there's only one SAQ on the test. But of course, one SAQ means that there are 3 different parts. All 3 must be addressed. Specific enlightened despots that you guys should be familiar with. Padre, you should be familiar with a couple of examples. Enlightened despots are more of one of those you need illustrative examples for essays. So, for example, if you wanted to talk about how Catherine the Great was an enlightened despot, and kind of explain the fact that, yes, she read Voltaire, yes, she had conversations with Diderot, but ultimately she continued to brutalize her people. You get the enlightened side and you get the despot side, and you kind of mash them together. Or Frederick the Great and how he would read, but he also had a very Prussian military rule. But no, for the test, you won't need to be able to say, oh, this is Frederick the First. That's not how this is. Guys, multiple choice questions are more geared towards overarching processes. So let's see. And analysis of primary documents. European. So looking through this. Okay, one more big effect of revolutions is that it kind of changes our social hierarchy. So especially as we get into our next unit where we have the advent of the new capitalist, what we'll start to see is that society used to be very stratified. If you were born at the top, you stay at the top. If you're born at the bottom, you're born at the bottom and you stay there. But with this idea of all men are created equal, with this idea that the Enlightenment changes everything, and with the revolutions to change the politics behind it, we're going to start to see a little bit more melding of those social classes. So that's important to see. In addition, you need to kind of be familiar with the importance of things like salons. So for example, the salons in Paris lead to a lot of these revolutionary talks and actions because of people exchanging information. So think about what other instances in history people have of exchanging information, and that exchange of information leads to revolutionary or very big changes in politics. What are overarching processes for this unit? The overarching processes for this unit, we start to see political revolutions pop out, and those revolutions are generally influenced by the Enlightenment, if not directly caused by the Enlightenment. With the sole exception of the English Revolution, which is kind of the reason why the Enlightenment came to be. Those are the big ones for this unit specifically. For the next half of this unit, big overarching ideas are going to be mostly technologically driven and isms, as well as how governments react to the revolutions. So we're only halfway through it. The overarching parts of everything that's come to be so far is mostly going to be Enlightenment and revolution, as well as some of the different ideas of that Enlightenment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think I have addressed what needs to be addressed for you guys. I'm looking one more time through to see if anybody else has anything written. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, good luck on your exam tomorrow. And again, most important part of review, you need to go to sleep at a reasonable hour, and you need to eat a good breakfast. Guys, your brain does not function without fuel. So when it comes time, around 9, 10 o'clock, you need to be looking at that bed. Nationalism didn't have an impact on the revolutions. It was kind of an impact of the revolutions. So nationalism really comes to be around Napoleon in its modern form. And we're going to start to see that, again, really impact things in our next half of this unit. We're going to start to see the unification of Germany and Italy. We see France really use nationalism to expand throughout during Napoleon's reign. And then we're also going to see nationalism start to lead to some of these issues that are going to come about in the 1900s. So again, that's all part of the second half of this unit. We needed to know it now so that we can build on that later. For extra credit will be offered on an exam such as this. Mr. Bell and I are still discussing what that's going to look like. So as soon as we have that ready to go, it'll most likely be a one-pager. You guys will have that in your hands. So ladies and gentlemen, again, go to bed at a reasonable hour, sleep well, wake up and get a good breakfast. Even if you don't like breakfast, get yourself a banana or something small, granola bar. You need fuel for your brain. Have a great evening.